has to do with the parable of the fig tree, a popular item these days, but specifically with Matthew 24:34, with the use of the phrase "this generation" and "these things." Now, I'm misunderstanding, I think, what the word generation means. How am I supposed to understand that?
Okay, let me just read it for the listener's sake. It says, this is Jesus in his Mount Olivet discourse, and he's prophesying. It's the longest prophecy of Jesus Christ. It's Matthew 24 in its entirety, and powerful stuff. And here he is saying, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Now, you have to know what has preceded this in context. He has talked about the wars, the rumors of wars, the persecution, all the things that he warns about in the opening verses leading up to verses 33 and 34. And then he says, this generation. Now, there's been a lot of debate about this. Did Jesus mean in saying this generation? Did he actually mean this generation as in that generation? Or the generation that sees all these things will not pass away till all of these things are fulfilled or take place. So did he necessarily mean the generation he was speaking to at that moment? There's another mode of thought that he was talking actually about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Jesus, right here, there's about 37 years from these words spoken by Jesus that Jerusalem was completely destroyed. Over 1 million Jews were slaughtered, and the rest of the Jewish people scattered to the four corners of the earth. The Mosaic system that had been established and been in place for all of those generations was completely obliterated, along with the temple. Was Jesus referring to that? I think there could be something to that one. I do think that it's worth considering anyway, that when Jesus says, this generation will by no means pass away till all of this takes place. If you study, for instance, Josephus, many of the signs Jesus spoke of took place prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. There were plagues, there were famines, there was tremendous persecution against the church we all know about. So could he have been talking about that? Could he have been referring to that? I think that's possible. There are others also who say that this is a double-pronged prophecy, that it had to do with things both near and far away. Both near, that some of it pertained to Jesus' generation, and far away, it reached all the way down to our day. I think there's some worth to that view as well. So I don't mean to be confusing. I don't mean to be throwing out a bunch of different possibles, but there are different possibles that I think hold weight. Derald, your thoughts?
As we look to, as you've been sharing about Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse as the great prophetic passage of our Lord Jesus Christ, or one of them, I should say, but as you said, a major one. He started off, the disciples were excited about looking at the temple and the buildings that were there. And Jesus then says, not one stone be left upon another in verse 2 of Matthew 24. And I was just in Israel about 2 months ago. And of course, whenever we do a tour over there, where we see the stones of the buildings laid all over Jerusalem and so forth, and that it was completely dismantled by Titus in 70 AD, the Roman general who quelched the rebellion. As you shared, 1 million Jews were killed, and the city was burned, and the stones were completely removed off of every single building there, as well as the temple itself was destroyed completely. And that was the fulfillment of what Jesus was talking about, not one stone be left upon another. Then he proceeded on to share with us about what's going to be the signs of the end times. There's going to be many false Christs. He says, don't be deceived. They will come in my name, but don't be deceived. He then talks about the famines and the pestilences and the earthquakes and kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation, and so forth. And then he says, these are the beginning of sorrows. And that word sorrow speaks of a woman going to labor. She's pregnant. and she's going to be going into labor. And that when a woman goes into labor, the pains become more frequent as time goes on and more intense as time gets on, to finally there's that birth that will take place. And so it is Jesus telling us these events are going to get worse and worse and worse as we progress through history, and you're going to be persecuted for my name's sake. And there's going to be many false prophets and the gospel will be preached to the whole world until the end. And then Jesus catapults us into the 7 years of tribulation, talking about the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. He says, have an understanding of these things. Go back and learn Daniel chapter 9 and so forth. And then he talks about his second coming. And then he goes into that verse 32, what you're talking about. He says, learn this parable of the fig tree, which it says, when its branch is already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So it's important for us to realize, what is this fig tree all about? He says, learn the parable of the fig tree. Well, it's pretty short, it's pretty short. There's only one verse there. And then he talks about coming in that generation. Well, we know that Israel is referred to as the fig tree in Jeremiah chapter 24. So it's a symbolism of the nation. And then also he speaks of it through the Jewish prophet Hosea 9:10, again reaffirming the symbolism of the nation. And Jesus cursed the fig tree right before he was going to go to the cross and so forth. Why did he curse it? And it died. Well, it had no fruit on it. In other words, Israel, the nation itself, was not bearing fruit to God, did not recognize their own Messiah, did not study the prophetic scriptures. And so he says they're going to be cursed. And thus we have the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the diaspora, where they're dispersed amongst the nations of the world. But he says when it begins to bring forth fruit, and it begins to shoot forth from the earth once again, that fig tree, recognize that I'm coming in that generation.